Hi everyone, it's Henry here, and I want to invite you along on a project. In fact, I want to cover this entire army painting project from start to finish with you guys along for the journey. So that includes all the ups, all the downs I'm going to experience on it, as well as the new things that I'm hoping to learn and some of the classic knowledge that I think I have, but perhaps needs refining or just maybe even relearning in some cases because I haven't used it for a little while. And they often say that one of the best ways to learn stuff is to teach it as well. So I'm hoping that that will come into play. So if you fancy it, come join me and let's paint. So I guess first up is why this project? Why an army project? Well, I haven't done one of these in ages, and I have a real desire to try and evolve the channel a little bit and to do something new. So in the past, we've covered a few little things like a Black Templars project we did, sort of smaller combat patrols and kill teams, things like that. But what I'd really love to do with this is go through the whole process, or my whole process, of going about collecting and painting an army. So what's the motivation for this outside of creating good content? And as I say, trying to evolve what we're doing here on the channel. What's it mean to me? Why do I want to achieve this? Well, to be blunt with you, I'd really love something to show off at next year's MPO Bristol. So that's going to be happening in May in Bristol, obviously, hence the name. And I would really like to have a properly decent-sized army to show off for people to enjoy, because that's the painting that I tend to enjoy the most, certainly doing and often looking at painted armies. And yeah, it's just fun to be able to share, right? So there's my prime motivation, or sort of a deadline for the project. But along with that, what's the motivation? Why Cathay, for instance? Well, it's a new old world army. I love old world. You'll have noticed I've been doing quite a lot of old world videos now over the last sort of 12, 18 months, and I would love to ramp that up further. And when Cathay first came out, I looked at them sort of objectively and thought, beautiful minis, not for me, move on. And then when I knew I was going to do a video for the YouTube channel on them, I wanted to do my research, do my due diligence, and so I sort of did a deep dive on what I could get hold of on Cathay. So that included the Arcane Journal, but prior to that, it was essentially looking at a lot of the stuff we'd got off of Warhammer Total War. And after a good few weeks of doing this, of reading into it, of looking at art, official art, fan art, all of that, I became fairly obsessed with them. It's so cool having something so new in Warhammer the Old World, but also it's still feeling very, very Warhammery, for want of a better term. I think the design team have done a fantastic job. So when they sent through the battalion box and bits and bobs for review, I wanted to do a little bit more with them than just paint a model up for the channel. And I've been itching to get to grips with an army project for ages. I've been flitting around with different ideas for the content of that army and ergo the content for the channel. And this just seemed to tick an awful lot of boxes. So the first things first is I was going to need to do a few testers just to see how viable this project was even going to be. And I guess that's the first point really I wanted to touch on, is I think testers are very, very important, test models. And I think if you're going to embark on an army project, and all of this is just my point of view, this is just how I go about collecting it. So I would love to hear whether you agree, whether it's a similar approach you take, or whether there are drastically different approaches you like to take. So pop those down in the comments, because this whole journey is going to be as much about the input from you guys and feedback from you guys as it is about the stuff I'm presenting on the video. But the testers themselves, I think if you're going to embark on something this time intensive and financially, it's hundreds and hundreds of pounds to start a new army, as well as I say, all the hours in it. You need to know if it's going to work. So I think you need to sacrifice models to be testers, whether that's 1, whether that's 5, whether that's 10. In this case, I've gone for sort of about 15 models in total that I would class as the testers for this army project. And the reason I think the testers become so important is it's not just to do with, will the colours work together? We'll talk about that quite a lot in a minute, but it's also to understand, how viable is this as an army project? How long is this project going to take me? Can I achieve it in the time frame that I have set myself? everybody paints at completely different speeds. I'm pretty sure I'm quite a slow painter. I don't know exactly if I am or not, but I don't think I'm super fast. But I'm also very, very reluctant to use words, particularly when I'm talking about army painting. I don't want to use words like easy or fast or quick or things like that, because I think, well, I have felt in the past when other people I've respected have said things like that, I found it a little bit demotivating to hear that, because I've thought to myself, well, why don't I find that easy? Why can't I do that quickly? And then it's just coming to realise that it doesn't matter. You paint at the speed you paint, and as you get more experience and you get better at it, you may become more efficient. But that doesn't mean you're necessarily going to get really, really quick at painting. And I think I want this to be a show-off army. There's no two ways about it. It's not going to be a display level army in my head, as in I'm not going to paint everything to the absolute best of my ability, but it is an army that I would like when I go to an event, and my intentions are to go to some events with this army. I want to put it on the table and my opponent thinks it's really cool, and they want to engage with it and they want to talk about it a little bit. I'd love for it to get nominated for things like Best Army. That's a real thrill. That really appeals to me. That's the stuff I love looking at whenever I go to events or I judge things at events. That's why I paint, really. That story and that cool factor that you can get with creating a beautiful looking army. So I think there's an element of having to understand that if I want that end result, I have to be willing to take my time on it. You may have seen I did a recent Beastman video. That's almost the other end of the scale. That was equally enjoyable as this. I've absolutely loved it, and I've no intentions of stopping that project. But that Beastman art project is all about efficiency. That's kind of finishing a model in one session. So it's kind of a lot of the work of that is done in the creating the models themselves, curating the collection, and evoking some sort of emotion when you see them. It's not necessarily about having perfect technical execution on everything. This I want to be closer towards having really good technical execution on stuff, not foregoing any of that storytelling or that cool vibes, but taking more time, enjoying the layers of complexity that I may be able to create within the project itself. And that's simply going to take me time to do. And if I've done these test models, you can see that I'm working on here. And then once I was happy with it, I felt I needed to do a unit of 10, because if I can't get that unit of 10 down to a fairly realistic time frame, then I have to accept that I can't do the Cathay project that I want to do. So there was a few things I wanted to consider with the colours, and that's not just things like, okay, what colour primer am I best to start with? What order am I? What best order is it to paint the model in? Those are things that I'm going to find out as I'm painting it, but the sort of before I'm even getting to that stage of putting the paints on the model or even picking the paints, off the shelf, in my head, I kind of already knew I wanted to do a very light colour, probably an off-white. And this is, one, it's a colour I love painting anyway. I just do. I don't know why, I just enjoy it. But also I know it looks good at distance. I know it looks good on the table. So that was cool. And it's quite striking, and as I said at the start, what was the motivation? Well, it was for people to think it looks cool, to show it off and hopefully, bring a smile to when people are looking at it. And colours like white, colours like yellow, they do elicit that type of response, because I think a lot of people find them quite challenging to paint, and therefore we don't see them as often. I did a ton of this research, and it was great because we got that Warhammer community article which showed all those great different schemes everyone had come up with from the various content creators. I really enjoyed looking at, and obviously Andy's scheme was in there as well, which is up on our Patreon. You can go and check out that tutorial now. So seeing those schemes was really inspirational. But then also, I did a deep dive on the lore. They talked about it on another Warcom article as well, that obviously sort of medieval China was a huge influence on this Cathay project. And, you have things like the Tang dynasty, which is that red and blue colour that actually Andy used and a few other people use. And that is a really cool classic sort of combo that you can use. And with it being Warhammer, red is fairly prevalent anyway in various colour schemes. But for me, I wanted to do everything I could to differentiate these from the other human factions in the old world, so namely the Empire and Bretonnia. Yes, obviously there's there's other sort of niche ones, but those two key ones. So I was quite keen to try and perhaps use colours that you didn't see as often with those factions. Now, I'm not saying you never see an off-white Empire or Bretonnian project. Obviously you do, but it's less common. Whereas reds, blues, even I suppose yellows to a degree, you tend to see more of with those factions. So I thought, okay, let's steer clear of those if I can, and try to create some interesting colour combos. I knew that I wanted to do an off-white. So the question was, did I do a warm off-white or did I do a cool off-white? I thought, okay, I'll do a cool off-white. I'll base it using a green or a blue. And then depending on what colour I'm going to use to base it with, I can use my colour wheel to figure out, okay, what would be some colours that are going to work well with that. Again, this is all stuff that I don't really talk about when I do videos on here often. And I'm really hoping this isn't going to bite me in the arse, be really boring for people. But the colour wheel is incredibly useful. So let's take a look at the colours that we're going to use here so to shade the white with. So I've chosen to use Incubi Darkness, which is sitting somewhere around on this colour wheel. If you look at that inner circle of colours, somewhere around that sort of dark sea green, Prussian blue, somewhere in there, right? It's sitting somewhere in that area. So the simplest way for me to look at, okay, what other colours could, and obviously you can use any colour you like, you can always make it look cool, but if we're going to use sort of classic, basic colour theory, we've sort of got two ways we can look at for the accompanying colours that I can use on the model. So I'm thinking ahead, thinking, okay, what am I going to be able to use for things like the sash, things like the metal trim, basically the other dominant colours on the miniature. As it was, this ended up informing nearly every colour choice I made on the model, which was really cool because basically I've given myself more time to do this project, hence why you guys didn't get a video last week. But back to this. If we're somewhere in that sort of dark sea green, Prussian blue area, we can either use the opposite, what's opposite us on the wheel, so it's somewhere in that sort of yellow ochre range, or we can use analogous, so colours that are next to us. So we can go more into the blue, possibly even into purple, or we could go the other way and go more sort of that classic green or the emerald colours. Now, the Jade Warriors, the sash and stuff suggests that could be Jade. It seems to be that depending on what city you're from, that's more the surcoat, those sorts of colours. The sash generally is staying Jade. That's what the best I could understand it anyway from the background. So it's not particularly prescriptive, which isn't a bad thing, but can be challenging. But I thought, okay, great. Well, let's move more towards the sort of traditional green colours, so the emeralds and jades and colours like that. So I know that I can go that way for the sash and it will look really, really nice. I can move opposite and look at those ochre colours. That will also look really, really nice. I'm thinking, okay, great. Well, maybe if I do this Celestial Guard, these bodyguard models, I could use a little bit more of the ochre colour. I think typically I'm going to confuse myself here. I'm sure when I looked at it, there was a thing to do with sort of yellows being associated more with royalty and stuff in sort of traditional Chinese sort of colours. How potentially Western you tend to associate things like purple more with royalty. There was definitely something about yellow being more a royal thing. And I thought, oh great, cool. So I could maybe use that on the sashes for the Celestial Guard unit. And then again, I'm looking at sort of going analogous the other way. You've got the purple colours. I thought, oh, lovely, right. So there's maybe a kind of tertiary colour, spot colour. I could use some purples in there. And we know things like Miao Ying, she's got a lot of purple on the box art anyway. So maybe there's a nice way to tie that in the future. So that was how I determined the shadow colour that I wanted to put under the white, and therefore what the white was going to be like, what the off-white was going to be like. The light grey is really not white. And that was then going to inform those other colours that I was going to use. So after muddling around with some testers, and I've eventually come up with what I think is a nice looking scheme. It's by nowhere executed to the level that I want the finished models to be executed to, and I haven't finished every single detail on there, but I felt that I had done enough details on the model to get cracking and give it a go across a few more. So this is how I've gone about painting the full 10. And before I jump into the actual painting itself, and well done for getting this long if you managed it, I just thought I'd make a brief mention on the paints. Once I decided on the paints that I wanted to use for this project, what I would do is get them all together in a dish so it's easy to see where they are on the desk. I'm not running around and muddling about. And also, if I do commit to going ahead with this for the full army project, what I will go out and do is buy fresh pots of most of these to make sure I've got a nice consistent batch and I'm not going to run out sort of midway through. Now we're actually going to start off with the skin, which might seem a little bit strange, but again, this is something that was discovered during the tester phase. I'm going to do a simple grayscale pre-shade, so white over black. And when I do this, I tend to use Tamiya flat white. And the reason for this is Tamiya is a solvent-based acrylic paint, so we want to use the Tamiya thinner with it, but it means you can thin it or dilute it right the way down, and it still sort of holds its integrity. It doesn't spider off, it doesn't go all horrible, and it stays really, really translucent, so really, really see-through. So I can build up these nice layers of, very, very dark grey through to medium grey through to white as a pre-shade or a pre-highlight, whatever you want to call it. And therefore the colours that I put over the top of that, as they hit those various greys, it creates a bunch of different tones for us just by using one coloured paint, which is awesome. And as you can see here, as you saw earlier, I was prepping the heads in a certain way to hold them all on these miniature holders. So when it came to the skin colour, just jumped on Google really and I Googled Chinese skin. And obviously, there's an enormous population in China with a huge variety of skin tones, but I found one that I really liked. I found a couple of different reference photos of that one that I really, really liked. I thought, that's the one I'm going to go for these Jade Warriors. And I'm looking forward to varying it up a little bit across the army. But certainly, for a batch of 10, I'll be doing all 10 exactly the same. Maybe I'll find a slightly different recipe and do another batch of 10 in that way. And in that way, I will end up with a nice mixture of them across the army as well. So here I'm spraying the lighter colour. Now, I have used paints that are no longer in production, or these exact ones are no longer in production, because they were the right colours. So don't feel that you have to try and search out these exact ones if you really like what I've done. And I've only used 2 paints, which I'm really, really happy about, because again, I think that's key when it comes to army painting, is using as few paints as you can get away with. That's how I enjoy it anyway. But these were the 2 colours that I felt allowed me, with that little pre-shade, to get to the skin colour that I wanted. Have a look at the colours. They're as accurate as I can get them on the screen. If you've got any questions about what I would use from various ranges, please ask in the comments and I will have a look around for you. But I hope it's pretty obvious and you can figure that out with your own collections of paints or what's available around you. But you can see here, by spraying that lighter colour over the pre-shade and then from below spraying that darker colour, we get a beautiful effect already with very little work. And we're going to revisit the skin later on in the process, but actually it made sense to do it at this point. Now, unless I'm using Tamiya, I'm going to be using water-based acrylic paints like this Citadel Ink by Darkness one, and whenever I'm using those, I'm going to be thinning them in my airbrush with Vallejo airbrush thinner. I found it works absolutely fine with all my water-based acrylics. The weather in the UK has been very, very warm during this project for us, sort of high 20s, low 30 degrees. And it's meant that painting has been a little bit more challenging than usual, but I appreciate a lot of people, we all spray in different conditions, don't we, from all over the world. So my paints are generally a little bit more dilute than perhaps I would typically be using. But that's the key with using your paints, whether it's airbrush or hairy brush, is dilute the mixture according to the situations and the properties that you want to get from the paint. So I'm spraying about 18 to 20 psi, and I'm thinning the paint. I'm using more thinner than paint in every single case. And I thought, yeah, why not? Let's try and spray an off-white that isn't Tamiya in 30-degree heat. That'll be fun. Actually, in the end, it was fine. I've decanted that Ulthuan Grey Air into a dropper bottle for an old army project, actually, the White Scars. So yeah, I had it. The reason I wanted to use this rather than Tamiya White is because I did want that slight off-white tone, and I liked what the Ulthuan Grey Air gave me. One of the things you will notice when you're using lighter paints, particularly your off-whites, is when you spray them on, the first few coats might look a little bit speckly. And it's quite a trick to try and understand the difference between when the paint is speckly because you haven't diluted it enough for the pressure that you're spraying it at, and more to do with the paint itself. And I have found that these light colours, these off-whites, always look a little bit speckly the first couple of coats. But as you can see here, as we start to apply a few more, they smooth right out. I'm pretty sure it's something to do with the pigment size that's used in these paints. because they're quite large pigments, white pigments. So I think that's why we end up getting that slightly speckly look. But just trust yourself, and you will begin to notice the difference between that effect and then when you're spraying another colour perhaps that's just, as I say, too thick for the pressure you're spraying at. And that's when you get those sort of more pronounced speckles, sort of dots on the model. So you see I'm going for a fairly simple colour in here, sort of zenithal. I'm not worrying too much about a specific kind of light source, just from above, and then make the shapes look interesting. I'm not going to let myself get bogged down too much in how realistic sort of the light sources and things like that are. I just want to make them make sense across the models themselves. So generally, stuff's facing upwards, it's going to be lighter. Stuff's facing downwards, it's going to be darker, and that's where I'm going to go with it. And this was the reason I did the skin first, because I actually found that to spray the helmets, I could comfortably mask the skin with my finger, and then just spray the green and the white on without getting on the skin, rather than having to mess around with masking, liquid mask or anything like that. So that was quite fortunate, and yeah, really, really useful. Obviously, I've managed to film nearly all of it off camera, so I'm really sorry. I promise the rest of the filming is nearly all better than this. But if you're still with me at this point in the video, I suspect you're gonna put up with it. But you can see, super simple. So from the front and above, we've gone really, really white, and then facing away, we've left it much, much darker. Next up, I'm going to do an oil wash. So I'm going to use a paint here called Payne's Grey. Now, this one's by Winsor & Newton. This is from their Artist Oil Colour series. I have diluted this with normal mineral spirits, or white spirits, we call them here in the UK. And I've mixed it roughly equal parts mineral spirit to oil. If you thin oil down too far, it will end up breaking apart and going really, really bitty. So start at 50-50 and tweak it from there. But I didn't want this to be a very, very thick wash. I didn't want to have to do too much reductive work where I go in as it's almost dried and remove some of it. I just wanted it to flow nicely, but say not so thin that it would break up loads. Now, I haven't done any varnishing. All I've made sure is that the paint underneath the acrylic paint is dry. And as long as it's dry, which doesn't take any time in this weather, you're absolutely fine to go ahead and use the oil straight over the top without any varnish at all. It doesn't need protecting. I just wanted to say a massive thank you to those of you that support us over on Patreon. Here you can see the awesome Cathay model Andy did over there. I recently did that for the Warhammer article, and he's done a full tutorial of how he's done that many over on Patreon. The support you guys give us on Patreon allows Andy and myself, and now Ben, to be on here full time creating all the different videos for you. So you're getting extra videos over on Patreon each month, usually multi-part, often display level miniatures from Andy, but there's going to be plenty of other stuff coming. And without that support, we simply wouldn't be able to do it all. So thank you very, very much. And if you can't support us on there for any reason, then hit the like button, hit subscribe, comment down below. All those things you hear people say on YouTube, they do make a big, big difference to things like visibility, which is, when you're a kind of boring painting tutorial channel, it's really useful when people share it if they enjoy what they do. But yeah, just to reiterate, you do not need to be varnishing underneath oil as long as that paint is dry that's underneath. It's not going to ruin any of your paint work at all. But I love using Payne's Grey. It's one of the earliest oil paints I picked up, and this is the original tube I picked up like 12, 13 years ago, I think it was. It's a beautiful sort of dark blue-grey colour. It's not an exact colour, and it will change between brands, but the Winsor & Newton is my favourite one because I think it leans more to the grey than it does to the blue. And here you can see, because that was a relatively dilute mix, it has sort of split out a little bit on certain areas. So I'm going in here now where all the mineral spirits have evaporated off, but the oil is not yet fully cured, so it's probably been left, 30 minutes, something like that. And I'm going in with a clean, soft brush, and I'm just wiping it away. If it doesn't come away and it just smooshes around the surface, I will pop that brush in some clean mineral spirits, touch off all of the excess so it's just a tiny bit damp, and then I'll use that to manipulate it and just clean it off, just on those raised areas where I say we had that sort of splitting effect that we didn't really like. Now, I wanted to leave the oils to dry as much as I could before painting over them, because if the oil's still drying, painting acrylics over the top can be really, really tricky. One of the big challenges with this model was I like to paint black under areas that I'm going to do a different colour. So particularly metallics, but also things like leather. So the question was, how could I do that without it adding a huge amount of time onto my paint job? Well, for me, the obvious one was to make black one of the colours, one of the secondary or tertiary colours I'm going to do. So that's exactly what I did. So in the process of blacking out the leather parts on the model, I also did I think it's a surcoat. Anyway, the cloth he's got underneath his armour, I just decided to do black. And the reason I like black is because it covers so well. So it actually ends up saving us a little bit of time. And because in this case, it's not completely neutral, I've gone for a slightly blue-black. Because again, I wanted that sort of nice bit of harmony with the blue that's on the rest of the model. It does allow the other colours on the model to sing more, which is why I love painting black, really. So here I'm using Corvus Black as the first highlight, and then what I do is just mix in a tiny bit of white for a secondary highlight on there. And it's not been lost on me that every time I say harmony when I'm painting Cathay, I'm going back to all the lore and everything, and how it's essentially their entire society is based around that. So next up is the leather. Now I'm going to go through things in exactly the order I've done them. So there'll be bits where we don't finish it. So like when I said the skin, we'll come back and finish the skin later. The same with the leather. This is the start of the leather, but in the process of painting, it made sense to do this bit at this stage. Now I'm going to use Thondia Brown here. It's one of my favourite colours. It's sort of a burnt umber colour. And nice and thin. So you can hopefully see on my nail, and you can probably see on my nail how warm it is and how quickly that paint is drying. But the reason I want it nice and thin is so that when we give it the first coat, the black shows through in patches underneath, and it just gives us that sort of weird variety of tones already on there, with almost no work at all. It's a real shame some of the texture it's leaving on the model because it's drying so quick, but I'm not going to let that sort of derail me. We'll be okay. Now here we've gone in and done the second, or the first highlight, I suppose, or the second coat. And hopefully you can see the difference between the model on the right and the model on the left, of which has had it. And what we want to do to get the same effect on this one on the left is we're going to focus not on highlighting the entirety of it, but just on sort of a few key areas where the light would hit it. So you see here I'm pointing out with my brush. Again, it's that idea of not having to paint every inch of the model to exactly the same level, but also using different styles of painting, different interpretations of light and colour and all the rest of it to speed the process up. So here we're going in with a mixture of Thondia Brown and Steel Legion Drab. And I'm just going in, say, keeping again, all the mix is really nice and thin. So make sure I haven't got too much on my brush so that it's not washing off my brush, but also nice and thin so that it's naturally blending with the colour that's underneath it as well. Again, just focusing on those areas that the light is going to hit. So following similar highlights where I've highlighted the white armour, I'll follow that down with how I've highlighted the leather or whatever's in that area as well. So next up in the process, at least, is the cloth. So say I settled in the end on going for that kind of jade colour. That wasn't my intentions to start with when I thought about it, but actually it does work really, really well. So there was too many pros to going for this type of colour than for trying to be different. I did test out on one of the tests you'll noticed earlier a sort of ochre colour. As I mentioned, I think I might use that for my my Celestial Guard or something like that. So again, keeping the paints nice and thin, partly because of the heat, but also just to aid with some of that blending, did mean I needed to do a couple of coats of Inky by Darkness to get a nice solid base coat to work from. Then we were going to layer up with Cabalite Green. It's basically the Dark Angels triad. It's Incubi, Cabalite and Cyberite. Just works great. So that's what I used. And here again, we're not going for that sort of classic heavy metal style where we highlight the furthest or the most pronounced areas the most and leave all the shadows in the dark. We're trying to think, okay, if the light's shining from this direction, what's facing it? What gets lighter? What's facing away will stay darker. And again, I think I probably did 2 coats of this. And the nice thing is that second coat, particularly with say the Cabalite Green, it's not going to be applied in exactly the same spot both times, and therefore you're instantly going to start creating an additional tone again with areas where that cabalite is a little bit more opaque. And then I mixed Cyberite into that cabalite to give myself highlight. When I did the test model, I went one step further and I did pure Cyberite, and I think it looks great, but I will probably save that for character models or command models and things, because whilst I think it is a worthwhile stage, and I think it does elevate it that little bit further, even across 10 models, that's an extra, what's that going to be? At least an extra 10 minutes, probably realistically, it's kind of an extra 15 minutes for me. So it was enough of a time chunk to go, do you know what? Across the unit, I can probably save myself a good bit of time by not going for that final highlight. But you can see on the back, I've not pushed the highlight quite so far, which partly saves time, but also you don't see the back of the models. So I'm not going to worry too much about it. So once that was all dry, I'm now going to go in with another oil wash. So this is a black oil wash, just black. This is Absalon 502 by AK I'm using here. So I've made up the wash exactly the same way as I did previously the oil wash, but this time I'm just going to apply it to the leather to give it some shading. I use oil washes a lot, particularly when it's warm like this. They don't really take any more time than acrylic washes, and I just prefer the look. It's how I painted when I got back in the hobby. It's a kind of softer shading, and I really enjoy it. I'm not someone who smothers the miniature in quite a thick oil mix and then removes loads of it. That reductive style of painting, super cool. It's just not what I'm doing here. And it's just a process I really enjoy. So I would suggest, if you do fancy it, grab a black, grab a brown, and have a play around. Now, once that was dry, it was time to do some refining of the models. So again, if we look here at the two, hopefully you can see a subtle difference. The one on the left, all the brown leather, has just that little extra pop than the one on the right. And we've achieved that by going in with the Steel Legion drab and focusing on those same areas that we did that first highlight on. But now, because it's quite a big jump, and I find this is particularly useful with leather, because it's quite a big jump up to this highlight, and because that black oil wash has just toned everything down a little bit, darkened the shadows, this it really helps this Steel Legion highlight sort of stand out. So I'm not doing a traditional edge highlight. I'm not going to go around every single edge. I'm going to do little tippy taps and scratches on the leather, and then I might do some sort of little swoosh things as well, just to create a little bit of texture, a little bit of interest, but also a little bit of difference when it comes to light and dark. And again, the reason that I chose those leather colours was because they were more towards that sort of ochre than they were towards, say, red. But I felt that I wanted to do something a little bit different for the cordage that's on the models. So I pushed further into that ochre and used this XV88 just to do any areas, I say, of little cords. It's not a huge change from the Steel Legion drab to this, but it's big enough that I think even at distance you can see the change, and it just helps separate those parts out a little bit further. And again, because I'm taking more time and more thought and more care with these models than I typically do, it's just really nice to be able to spend that bit of extra time and thought and do it. Perhaps if I was doing this for a normal recipe video, I'd have just done them Steel Legion drab, or maybe I've done the black or something like that. It was really nice to add that ochre in very deliberately. Now it's a case of going in and giving the white armour the same sort of treat, that sort of lamellar plate, and this, what I've decided to interpret as leather plate on the front as well. So more just little tippy tappy chips and scratches, just on a few key areas. Again, I haven't gone pure white with this, but I have mixed a little bit of the white into that Ulthuan grey. And now it's still the refining stage by all means, but this is very specifically the face, and I wanted to leave this in its entirety to give you guys an idea of exactly what I was doing. I didn't want to do the old paint the owl thing. So I am using exactly the same paints that I used with the airbrushing. So it's the light rust and the, is it called flat skin? Flat flesh, it's called, isn't it? And I'm just going to go in using them, again, very, very dilute, to start adding a few more shadows in and pushing some of those highlights that I introduced with the airbrush. And then obviously we need to address the eyeballs as well. So I'm painting here, I'm painting some ivory into the eyeballs. Again, just that sort of off-white, so trying to stay away from pure white anywhere on the model. So once I've got the whites in, I'm going to go in with the lighter colour, so the flat flesh. Is it flat flesh? I'm really doubting myself now. Let's get the pot of paints out. Where are you? So organised. Here we go. Yes, flat flesh, cool, yeah. So painting that flat flesh in and just re-establishing those areas of light and shadow on the face. And I'm really, really happy and quite proud of this sort of these two paints, being able to achieve this skin tone with those two paints over the pre-shade. You know, it's not going to win any awards or anything, but I think they look really nice. I think they look quite natural and really similar to the photos that I was looking at. And again, just two paints, it's lovely. I mean, obviously it's got the ivory and stuff for the eyes, but the main skin, being able to use those two was grand. So I'm really going to make the effort to apply the same thought that I put into this skin recipe when I do any other skin going forwards, because, you know, it can be done with just the two. It's just on me to try and find those two colours, I think, to do it with. You'll see that I'm using these little eggs, these miniature holders by Artist Opus in recent videos. Huge fan, so much so that we've now got a Cult of Paint edition egg, so you can get a black one if you like them. Yeah, I've loved them. I find them very comfortable. I've used for years and years. I've used the corks with a little weight on the bottom, and I still do because I don't have loads of these eggs. But when I'm just working on the one thing, I'm using these, and it's just a nice thing to hold. That's just works well for me. But I've had quite a few questions about them, so that's what we're doing. So now it's time to go in for the eyeballs, the irises rather. Now I find with this, if you try and paint them both slightly off to one side, it helps avoid getting that kind of cross-eyed look. I'm just using black paint here. I think I used a little bit of drying retarder on my wet palette when I did this. Just a few days ago I did this, but I'm pretty sure I did. It's one of the very few times I will ever use an additive other than water when I'm painting. But I'm pretty sure this was one of the 30+ degree days. So a little drop of drying retarder just helped, because we want that paint to leave our paintbrush really easily with very little pressure. And consequently that means having it at a certain consistency, which often dries before we get to the model itself. So I'm just trying to do two little dots slightly off to the one side, and obviously bearing in mind, or I was bearing in mind, how the model is oriented as well. Sort of have them looking, you know, over their shield at the enemy. And now I'm going back in with the flat flesh to just tidy up any mistakes. So her left eyeball, I'd obviously brought that black slightly out onto the cheek. The nice thing of colours that have got a lot of white in them, like this flat flesh, is they cover really well. So actually doing touch-ups it's not a lot of work. And I would say across the 10 models, most of them I was very happy with, which was lovely. There wasn't too much to go back and fix. There's a few that weren't perfect, but then I always have to remind myself, you know, this is going to be a unit of 20. The ones that don't look that fab, well, they can go in the back rank and get take off first, right? But yeah, there's the difference, say, just using the same paints, but taking that airbrush stage, which has given us that lovely sort of guideline, and just exaggerating and pushing everything a little bit further. Oh, now one change I did make. Previously on the handle of the swords, I had done them a sort of burgundy colour, that purple that I mentioned earlier. I just swapped it and did it the same as the XV88 that I'd done on the rest of the leather bits, because firstly, simplicity, you know, I could do that at the same stage that I do those things. But also, again, it just gives me the option for command models, character models, things like that in the future to help differentiate them a little bit further, I can use more of that purple or the burgundy colours. So now, before I'm doing the metals, I'm giving the models a couple of coats of finishing varnish. So this is a finishing varnish, means it's very, very thin. It's not going to do any protection, anything like that. It's just going to change the look of the model. And I've done a 50-50 mix here of ultra matte and matte, just to my taste, basically. A few coats of that, and now we can move on to the metals. And the reason I've done that is so that the metals will have a slightly different finish to them, obviously metallic, than the areas of non-metal on the model. So just providing a little bit of extra contrast on the miniature on the tabletop. I've gone for Balthazar Gold here. Lovely colour, mediocre coverage, but I really like the colour, so I went for it in the end. It did need 2 coats. And then I'm going to give that an oil wash of Starship Filth, which is a kind of dark grey-green colour. Really important, again, let that acrylic paint dry. As long as it's dry, we can go straight over the top with the oil wash like this. No fear at all of anything interacting. Going all horrible and ruining anything. The shields took flipping ages. Wish there'd been nothing on them and I could have just used decals. I haven't used any decals actually on these, and again that was very deliberate so that I can use decals on command models and character models and special units and stuff just to make them stand out a bit more. Next up, I wanted to have a few different colours of metal on the model. So I wanted to use a gold, but again, I didn't want to use perhaps a gold. Firstly, the whole model was starting to look pretty cold, which I was loving. So I didn't want to go putting too many warm tones on there. There's obviously some on there, but I didn't want to go putting loads more on there. And in the end, I just wanted a nice sort of oldish gold. So I've used Blighted Gold by P3 here. Then I've given it 2 washes, 2 coats of Poxwalker to give it a little bit of patina, a bit of age to it, and again to keep it cold. This is something you'll have seen me do probably on quite a lot of videos, is use Poxwalker for this effect. I think it's lovely. And then I'm going to highlight it up using Runal Brass. So again, quite a pale, quite a boring gold, which is what we want to go for. For me, the main colours on the model are the white, the off-white armour, that pinky copper trim, and that jade on the sash. Those are the 3 ones I want people to look at. All the other ones on the model are there simply to complement those colours, help those colours stand out, help them look nice. There's a ton of gems on the models. I decided that other than the one on their forehead, the rest of the gems would all be metal. Just kind of, embellishment. And the sword, I really wasn't sure what to do with the sword. And when I finally got to it, I was like, just keep it simple. Just a nice silver on the sword. Let light do its work. Keep it plain, keep it fantasy. Kind of low fantasy, I guess. Yeah, lovely. So I've used here Burnt Iron, I think it is, by Vallejo Metal Colour Series. The reason I've used that is because the consistency of this paint, if you apply it smoothly like this with a brush, quite long sort of strokes, you get a beautiful smooth finish with it. It runs into details very, very easily. And because it is so loose, you don't need to thin it down, whereas you might find when you thin metallic paints, often they can split out. So that's why I used it for that. And then I've picked up Iron Hands for an upcoming Heresy video that I'm going to be doing. Actually was like, oh, this is a nice little highlight colour for this. So let's use this. So this time I'm deliberately gone for a thicker paint so I can do sort of little edge highlights along there. So it'll stay where I put it. And that was it. And will I go back and do more to the swords? No. Will I do more with the swords on the character models? Yes, probably. I don't think I need to for this. And then it was a case of going in and just touching up anywhere I'd perhaps got some of the wash on areas I didn't want it, or maybe even a bit of the metallic paint where I didn't want it. So just going in and cleaning up, tidying up those areas, making it look as neat as I can. So just taking that extra level of care with this project over what I often do. And now it really was on to the sort of finishing touches. So it was time to glue the heads in. And the easiest way I found this was to put a little pool of super glue in an upturned base, and then dip the heads in there rather than try, as you can see, I'm a bit butterfingers anyway. But yeah, that was easier than sort of putting the super glue on the model. Normally I think it's better to glue the bit that you're not moving with your hand, but in this case felt this was the easiest way of doing it. So you may have noticed I haven't done any highlights yet on that copper colour, on that Balthazar Gold. So we've done the Balthazar Gold, we've done the Starship Filth oil wash, and now I'm going in with full Urite Copper just for a little highlight. Not tons of it, just that area, trying to follow that highlight down of where the lights hit it. So the top of the helmet, then you've got the collar, then onto the shield, then down onto the sash, then onto the boot. Hopefully that highlight runs all the way down that area of the model. That's kind of the bit I've spent the most sort of time and effort on. And this was a little recipe I discovered when I did the Eldar Fire Dragons video a few months ago. Really, really love it. Been itching to try it out on something else. And again, looking at the colour wheel, I realised that I could use this and it would be very complementary and not a colour I feel like we've seen on many of the other human armies. I think it's got quite a lot of high elf vibes about it, this scheme, which for me is spot on. You know, that works. I don't think they look like high elves, but I think they look closer to that than they do, you know, Empire and stuff. And if we're looking at those sort of classic influences, I think you can see quite a lot of sort of stylistic Asian influence in the high elf range. Now I'm going in and just highlighting up the helmet plume, just like I did the cloth. I left it to this point because I didn't see any point in doing any more when I was going to be handling it so much. And then finally the gem on the forehead. I really wasn't sure what to do with this. And then I thought, well, I love that classic military modelling, scale modelling style of gems where we do silvers and then a clear over the top. So I've done a dark silver, I've done a very, very light silver, and then I'm just going to pop, in this case, I'm going to pop a contrast paint over the top of that, just to give it something a little bit different. It looks really nice on the tabletop, less so in photos, I guess, but on the tabletop, I really love this effect. And it was such a similar colour to the sash, giving it that difference of finish I felt was important. So we know it's different materials, and it's easier than me having to paint in all that light and shadow. Whew, so there we go. Goodness knows how long this video's ended up being. I really, really appreciate it if you're still here. And if you are still here, bang that like button because you must have enjoyed something or you're a bit of a masochist, I think. But yeah, I have deliberately chosen not to do the bases. 2 reasons. Well, multiple reasons actually. One, I already knew this video was going to end up being super long. And secondly, basing is something that I really want to up my game in. I've said this multiple times over the last sort of at least year, if not 2 years, and I figured this was the opportunity to do that. So I've been working away on some testers. I'm going to do the whole unit in one go, but the basing will be a separate video, and I want to take you through the stuff I'm learning and I'm trying to implement that and make them look better. It was really, really tough not basing them and showing them off, but it's important, right? We're not doing things the same way we've done them, right? We're going to try and do things a bit different, and this is going to be one of those things where if it's proper for it to be in a different video, I'd like to do it and spend a bit more time on it in a different video. And here's them next to the one of the Beastman models I was on about, and actually one of my dwarf miniatures as well, the Dwarf High King I did maybe a year ago when he came out. I love all 3 of these schemes, but they are all different. The Beastman, I say, is a much simpler, I think much more vibes-driven scheme. The Dwarf, I think, sits somewhere in the middle of the 2. The Dwarfs, I was really enjoying playing around with all the metals and what you can do with that. Sort of very, very simple, bar the face and beard, essentially, was the take home with the Dwarfs. And then the Cathay, essentially just giving everything a little bit more time and thought and care. But I love them all. I want to continue doing all of these armies, and I will try to bring you updates on the Dwarves and the Beastmen as I dip in and dip out of them. But the priority for me, say for the next 6 months, is going to be Cathay, and I would like to bring that to you guys in a serialized set of videos on YouTube. I don't quite know how that's going to work. I don't know if the algorithm's going to like it. I don't know if you guys are going to like it. So I really need to know in the comments if you think this sort of project log is going to be a good idea. The other element of that is that you can have some degree of control over what I do. So for instance, for the next big video in this project, I either would like to do the cavalry or I would like to do the lanterns. And I would like to do both in as thorough a way as possible. It won't be all identical to this video by any means, but I want to deep dive more into why I'm doing what I'm doing, why I've chosen, because I'm hoping, much like when I've spoken to people and got that information from them and learned, I hope this can be useful and helpful and entertaining for you in projects that you might be doing in the future. Now, there will inevitably be tons of things I've forgotten to explain in this video, and I apologise for that It's not intentional. I'm not trying to leave stuff out and, let's say, paint the owl type things. It's just this is a new style and a new way of doing things for me. So if there's stuff I haven't mentioned, please do ask those questions down in the comments and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Thank you ever so much for all of your support for the last 4 years on the channel and hopefully for many, many years going forwards. And we're going to start that off now with this new Army Painting Cathay project. Take care and I'll see you next time. If you've liked any of the models in this video and you fancy having an army of them yourself, but perhaps you don't have the time or wherewithal to get it done, consider dropping us an email at commissions@cultofpaint.com and maybe Ben can sort you out.